Thank you very much. Our lives are not all about rivalry and resentment and feuding. Those are childish, they're destructive, and actually they're just plain silly. They're the tropes of fiction. They're fun to read about or to watch on Netflix, but they don't reflect our real lives. By and large, you and I simply don't have enemies. Now, I want to spend these 10 minutes thinking about how not having enemies works in a school, because that's where I work, and this event is all about education. So, amongst the group of individuals working in our school, we have no enemies. We're all trying to maximize benefit to our students, and therefore, we're on the same side. And that means, de facto, we are not each other's enemies, even if we don't always agree on everything, because not agreeing about something doesn't make me your enemy. Our students in school are not our enemies. That would be absurd. We want them to be happy and successful and decent human beings. And every single one of those children, without exception, also wants to be a happy, successful, decent human being. And given that, we cannot be enemies. Our students' parents, and this can be quite difficult for both teachers and parents to understand sometimes, our students' parents are not our enemies. We and they want the same thing. And this is achieved much, much more successfully if we are allies and we treat each other as allies than if we fuel feelings of enmity. Now, you may say that I'm an idealist and that life just isn't like that and it's a dog-eat-dog world and if you don't get ahead, you perish. Well, actually, if you say that, I largely agree with you. I don't recommend being weak or being passive or going with the flow man or any of that stuff. And I love competition. I want to win and I respect winning. My point is, you and I, or someone else and I, are not enemies. I don't hate you. I don't need to destroy you. In order to get where I'm going, I don't need to beat you to the ground, stand over you, and force you to admit defeat. I never have to do that, ever. Again, I don't mean that everything is awesome and that there are no problems. There are loads of problems. But enmity is much more about emotion than it is about rationality. In the sense that when I feel myself getting cross, I naturally want to find someone to blame so I can maintain my own self-confidence. The bad thing is not my fault because it's somebody else's fault. I'm my friend, and that person, that other person, is my enemy. So I've been monitoring and recording my own tendency to make enemies in my head. And I'll give you just one example. A few weeks ago, I was working on the final interior design plans for the main lobby of our new junior school building at WellingTEN College, Bangkok. I'd realized that the front desk was in the wrong place. So I emailed the interiors guy, who was excellent, and I really enjoy working with him, to suggest a change. I said, move the desk from over here, it was actually in a different room, out of that room, over to here, central, because that's the best place in terms of customer service. He came back to me a couple of hours later via email with an alternative idea, a kind of a compromise. He said, all right, I don't want to put it there, I want to put it over there. And I didn't like that because the desk still wasn't where I knew it should be. And as soon as I saw his email and started reading it through, I could feel these enemy chemicals starting to flood my brain. I noticed myself creating what I call an enmity narrative in my mind in that instant. I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't want to do what's best for the school. He's deliberately making a bad suggestion. He wants to beat me. He wants to impose his ideas on my school. He thinks he's more important than I am. That's what I started thinking. And this is me thinking about a guy who I know is great to work with. He's intelligent, he's thoughtful, he's flexible, and of course, he's the expert in his field and not me. And this is me. I'm the person that says no enemies. And even then, I'm creating this enemy story in my head. I really had to stop myself from sending that vicious email back that we all do occasionally. It was hard to stop doing it. I did stop doing it, and I settled down. I took a bit of time to think about it, and I composed a much more sensible email. I explained in a little bit more detail what I wanted and why I wanted it, and I sent that email off. He replied in due course saying, "Oh, now I understand. There's no problem. Let's put it there. Problem solved." And I suppose, in his head, at the other end of the email line, he was probably creating his own enmity narrative as well, probably imagining this monstrous idiot me who knew nothing about interiors and was trying to destroy his vision. It could have become a real nightmare, but fortunately, it didn't. And in a school, and probably in every workplace, this sort of semi-communication breakdown happens all the time. Between parents and teachers, between students and other students, between admin staff in the office and educational staff, teachers in the classroom. And one of my personal favourites, because it happens so often, between primary school teachers and senior school teachers, who sometimes almost seem to despise each other on principle. And especially, I think, in today's hyper-Puritan world, where it seems sometimes to be a requirement of citizenship that we make ourselves super sensitive to any possibility of offense and construct mean-spirited tweeting over reactions to everything. In that world today, the conscious and deliberate implementation of the no enemies policy seems to me more important than ever. Now, in 2016, two researchers called David I. and Gilovich published a really fascinating paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that discussed their concept of what they call the headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry. And they demonstrated through some very interesting research that the average person generally believes that he or she faces more difficulties in life than the average person does. In other words, you believe that your life is more difficult than everybody else's. And you believe that your life is more difficult than everybody else's. And everybody in this room believes that somehow their life is more difficult than everybody else's life in the room. Now, this headwinds, tailwinds analogy is taken from scenarios such as going for a run or going for a bike ride. When you're running and the wind is blowing against you, you feel the extra struggle constantly. You really have to push to keep going. And yet, when you turn or when the wind turns and it's finally behind you, giving you assistance, you notice it for a couple of minutes, and then magically you just forget about it. The sense of having to fight is so much more palpable than the sense of having it easy. Think about it. Do you feel that you're the hardest working member of your organization? One day a few years ago, I was in my office and there came a knock on the door. And come in, the door opened. It was teacher A. She came in, she looked a bit upset. She said, "Chris, can I have a word with you?" I said, "Yes, come in, take a seat." She sits down, starts crying. I get the tissues. "What's the matter?" She said, "Chris, you know me, I work really hard. I'm here till 7, 8 o'clock every day, every evening. I'm working for those kids, I'm working for their parents. That's all I care about. I do everything for the children. And I look across the corridor and I see teacher B," she says, no names, no pack drill. "I see teacher B and he's not working anything like as much as I am. He's going home at 4:30 every day. I don't feel like he cares, and it's so difficult for me to carry on when there are other teachers who just don't care as much as I do." She was really upset. We took half an hour to talk it through. She went away. Lo and behold, a couple of hours later after lunch, another knock on the door. Who do you think it is putting their head round? It's teacher B. He comes and says, "Chris, I've got to talk to you." I said, "What's the matter?" He's angry, his hands are shaking. I said, "Take a seat." He said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Chris, you know how hard I work. I'm working all day long. I really care about the kids. They're all I do this job for. I have to go home at 4:30, but you know why? I've got a family. I have to take care of them. I've got to make dinner. I've got to put them to bed. So after they're in bed, 7:30, 8 o'clock, I'm back to work. I'm working till 10, 11 every evening because I really care about my job. I look across the corridor, and there's Teacher A. Is she working hard? No, she's not. She's always talking about stuff, but she's never really getting anything done. It's so frustrating, he said. I feel like I can't go on working this hard when other people aren't doing as much as I am. What do you think? Headwinds, tailwinds, enemies. What everybody needs to do in that situation is back up a little and try a reset. So suppose that every time your own enmity narrative started up in your head, you stopped and you reflected, and then you shut it down again. What would you actually lose? Because I don't think you lose anything. And what would you gain? Now, you'd gain a lot, because suddenly you would be working with everybody instead of against them. Now, I know, we all know, there is something very comfortable about being convinced that you have enemies. As I said earlier on, it makes you feel all the more righteous when you feel that you're fighting the good fight for reason and justice against those hordes of barbarian fools and psychopaths who are trying to destroy you through their malice and their stupidity, battling that antagonistic wind rather than freewheeling down the hill. But I suggest to you that there is actually something much more comfortable about simply deciding and reminding yourself often that you have no enemies. And I invite you to try it. Thank you very much.